"We're taking over," my son barked, shoving his suitcases through my door like he already owned the place. I just smiled and let them barge in. But the second they stepped into the great room and saw what was waiting for them, every drop of color drained from their faces. Before I continue, let me introduce myself. My name is Vincent Morrison. I'm 68 years old and I live in a mountain cabin in Aspen, Colorado. For 35 years, I built something from nothing. Started as a line cook at a diner in Denver, ended up owning 5 restaurants under my own name, Morrison's Grill. Maybe you've heard of it. Sold the whole chain 3 years ago for $4.2 million. Not bad for a kid who grew up washing dishes for minimum wage. Now I spend my days fly fishing on the Roaring Fork River and collecting rare 19th century cookbooks. Peaceful life, quiet life, the kind of life I earned. At least that's what I thought. Let me tell you about my son, Timothy. He's 41 now, works as a mid-level IT manager at some company in Aurora. Makes decent money, around $82,000 a year, last I heard. Not that he ever talks to me about his life anymore. That stopped about 6 years ago, right around the time he married Rebecca. Rebecca Morrison, formerly Rebecca Hayes, is 38, doesn't work, and has never met a mirror she didn't like. She used to be a real estate agent before she decided that being Timothy's wife was a full-time job. Her full-time job, as far as I can tell, is spending money they don't have and looking down her nose at people she considers beneath her. That list, unfortunately, includes me. I remember when Timothy was a boy, he'd run to the door every time I came home from a shift, his little arms reaching up for me. "Daddy, Daddy!" He wanted to hear everything. What I cooked, who came in, what funny things happened. He used to say he'd work in my kitchen one day. That boy had stars in his eyes. We'd spend Saturday mornings together at the restaurant. I'd let him crack eggs, teach him how to flip pancakes. His little hands could barely hold the spatula, but he was determined. "Like this, Dad?" he'd ask, tongue sticking out in concentration. "Perfect," I'd tell him. "You're a natural." He had dreams back then, real dreams. Wanted to go to culinary school, maybe take over the business someday. We'd plan menus together, talk about expanding to different cities. I was saving money for his education, putting aside everything I could so he wouldn't have to struggle like I did. But dreams have a way of dying when the wrong person gets their claws into you. I don't know where that boy went. The change was gradual at first. After high school, Timothy went to community college for computer science instead of culinary school. More stable, he said. Better future. I was disappointed, but I understood. Not everyone's cut out for the restaurant business. The real change came later. After the wedding, Timothy started calling less. Once a week became once a month. Once a month became holidays only. Then even the holidays got shorter. Our conversations became stilted, awkward. He'd ask about my health, I'd ask about work. We'd talk around everything that mattered. I tried to stay connected, invited them to dinner at the restaurants, sent birthday cards with generous checks, offered to help when Timothy mentioned they were looking for a house. But there was always a wall there, and I could feel it getting higher every year. Christmas 2 years ago was the last time I saw them before everything fell apart. I'd made a prime rib roast, my specialty, and was telling a story about a famous food critic who once tried to sneak into my kitchen. The guy had pretended to be a health inspector, walked right into my prep area with a fake clipboard. "So there I was," I said, carving the roast, explaining my sauce technique to this guy when I notice he's taking notes on restaurant letterhead. Turns out he was writing a review the whole time. Rebecca rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. She picked at her food like it was beneath her, then announced she was watching her carbs and pushed the plate away. "It's very heavy," she said, wrinkling her nose. "I prefer lighter cuisine." Timothy said nothing. He just stared at his hands, pushing food around his plate like a kid who didn't want to eat his vegetables. That's when I knew I'd lost him. My son, who used to beg for seconds of everything I cooked, couldn't even pretend to enjoy a meal I'd spent hours preparing. But the moment that really opened my eyes happened about a year ago. I'd called Timothy's phone on a Tuesday evening, just wanting to catch up. He must have pocket answered because I heard voices. Their voices. The conversation that changed everything. "That old man still kicking around?" That was Rebecca, her tone dripping with something I can only describe as contempt mixed with impatience. "When's he going to leave us the money and stop being such a burden?" My hand tightened on the phone. I should have hung up, but I couldn't. I had to hear what came next. Soon probably, my son replied. My son, the boy I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. He's not getting any younger, and he's been acting weird lately, forgetting things. Good, Rebecca said. Maybe we can speed things along. I've been doing some research. I hung up then, my hands shaking. Sat in my kitchen for about an hour, just staring at the wall. 35 years of building a legacy? And my own son was just waiting for me to die so he could cash in. Worse than that, they were actively planning for it. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I began listening to the little things, noticing patterns I'd missed before. The way Rebecca's eyes would calculate the value of everything in my house. How Timothy would deflect questions about their finances. Change the subject when I asked about their apartment. The nervous glances they'd exchange when I mentioned my will, but it was the phone calls that really woke me up. Over the next few weeks, I started getting curious inquiries from people I barely knew, old acquaintances asking about my health, with just a bit too much concern in their voices. The most alarming came 4 months ago from Dr. Taylor, an old acquaintance from the country club. We'd played golf maybe 3 times in 10 years, so when he called out of the blue, I knew something was up. Vincent, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to check if everything was all right with your health. I set down my coffee. I'm fine, Doc. Why do you ask? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Well, I had a rather unusual visit yesterday. A woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law came to my office. She was asking very specific questions about the process for having an elderly relative declared mentally incompetent, about guardianship procedures in Colorado. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Did she give you a name? Rebecca Morrison. She said she was deeply concerned about your episodes of confusion, your difficulty managing finances. She wanted to know what kind of medical documentation would be required for a competency hearing. I thanked Dr. Taylor and hung up. Then I made some calls of my own. It took me about 3 hours to confirm what I already suspected. Rebecca had visited at least 4 different doctors over the past 6 months, telling each the same story about a confused elderly father-in-law who needed intervention. She was building a paper trail. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Timothy as a little boy, how he used to sit on a milk crate in my kitchen, watching me prep vegetables for the next day's service. He'd ask 1,000 questions. Why do you cut the onions that way, Dad? What makes the sauce taste better? How do you know when the meat is done? I'd answer every single one, teaching him everything I knew about cooking, about business, about life. I thought I was raising him to be strong, independent, honest. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed. But I wasn't going to roll over and die just because my son had lost his backbone. The next morning, I drove to Denver. Richard Palmer's office was on the 15th floor of a building on Court Place. He specialized in elder law, protecting seniors from exploitation, handling estate disputes. I'd found him through careful research, not through any personal connection. When you're planning for battle, you don't want your general to have divided loyalties. Mr. Morrison, he shook my hand firmly. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was lined with law books and had the quiet confidence of success. You said on the phone this was urgent. I told him everything. The overheard phone call, Dr. Taylor's warning, Rebecca's doctor shopping, my growing suspicions about their financial situation. Richard listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair. Colorado has strong laws protecting at-risk adults, he said, but guardianship cases can get complicated. The burden of proof is on the petitioners, but they don't need much. A couple of friendly medical opinions, some testimony about erratic behavior, and a judge might grant temporary guardianship pending further evaluation, which gives them control of my assets in the meantime. Exactly. Once they have guardianship, even temporary, they can freeze your accounts, sell your property, make medical decisions. It's very difficult to reverse. My stomach churned. So what do? We get ahead of it. Document everything. Record conversations. Colorado is a one-party consent state, so as long as you're part of the conversation, it's perfectly legal, and I think we should bring in additional help. He reached for his phone. I know a private investigator, former police detective, 20 years on the force. Very discreet if Your daughter-in-law has been making moves. Sarah will find out. Sarah Brooks. The name would become very important over the next few weeks. We spent 2 hours mapping out a preliminary defense strategy. Richard explained the legal landscape, the typical tactics used in elder exploitation cases, the kind of evidence that would hold up in court. By the time I left, the sun was setting over the Denver skyline. The drive back to Aspen was long and winding, giving me plenty of time to think. I thought about the restaurants I'd built, the thousands of decisions I'd made over 3 decades. Every hire, every menu change, every negotiation with suppliers and landlords and critics. I'd survived recessions, health scares, difficult employees, and demanding customers. I'd built an empire from nothing because I understood one fundamental truth. You can't wait for problems to solve themselves. You have to act decisively, strategically, and you have to be willing to make the hard choices. This wouldn't be any different, except this time, the enemy was my own family. It was nearly midnight when I pulled into my driveway. The cabin was dark except for the porch light I'd left on. I sat in my car for a few minutes, looking at the house I'd worked so hard to buy. $2.3 million for a piece of paradise in the mountains. A reward for 35 years of 70-hour work weeks, missed holidays, and sacrificed relationships. I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me, especially not my own son. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. 3 days later, the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. Diana, my neighbor, usually just walks in through the back, and the delivery guys know to leave packages on the porch. I set down my coffee and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures, tall one, shorter one. Lots of luggage. My heart started pounding, but not from surprise. I'd been preparing for this moment. I reached into my pocket, found my phone, and hit the recording app I'd set up. Richard had been very clear about the legalities. As long as I was part of the conversation, everything they said would be admissible in court. I opened the door with my biggest smile. "Dad!" Timothy pushed past me before I could say a word. He was dragging 2 massive suitcases behind him, their wheels scraping against my hardwood floors. "We heard you bought this gorgeous cabin in Aspen. We're moving in. Time to put all those silly misunderstandings behind us, don't you think?" Rebecca stood behind him, surveying my living room with the calculating eyes of an appraiser. She had 3 more bags and was already mentally rearranging my furniture. "Timothy," I said, keeping my voice pleasant and warm. "Rebecca, what a wonderful surprise. Isn't it?" Rebecca was practically vibrating with excitement. "Family reunited at last. We've been so distant lately," and I said to Timothy, "We need to fix this. Family is everything." "Family is everything," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. The irony was almost too perfect. Timothy finally met my eyes. For just a moment, I saw something there. Guilt, maybe, or shame. Then it was gone, replaced by that blank look Rebecca had trained into him over the years. "It's good to see you, Dad," he said, though he couldn't quite maintain eye contact. "Is it?" Rebecca laughed, that high, brittle sound she made when she was nervous. "Oh, Vincent, always with the jokes. Now, which room is ours? We've had such a long drive from Aurora." I smiled wider. "Of course. Let me help you with those bags." As they struggled with their luggage in the hallway, bickering about which suitcase went where, I watched them with new eyes. Rebecca was already making plans. I could see it in the way she examined the crown molding, tested the firmness of the couch cushions, calculated the square footage. Timothy just looked tired, defeated, like a man who'd given up, making his own decisions years ago. "How long are you planning to stay?" I asked innocently. Rebecca and Timothy exchanged a glance. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, we're not really sure," Rebecca said with false casualness. "We're between leases right now. Thought it might be nice to spend some quality time together, get reacquainted." "Between leases?" I nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, you're always welcome here." The first 3 days of our family reunion were educational. Rebecca started making herself at home immediately, offering suggestions for improvements with the enthusiasm of someone who planned to implement them permanently. "These curtains, Dad, they look so dated. We should replace them." She ran her fingers along the hand-woven fabric I'd bought from a local artisan in Snowmass Village. "I know a great designer in Denver. She could really transform this place." Transform. There was that word again. transform my $2.30 million cabin into something that fit her vision, her taste, her name on the deed. That's an interesting idea, I said. These were custom made by a local artist. Cost me about $8,000, but I suppose they could use updating. I watched her eyes widen slightly at the price. She was doing mental math, calculating the value of everything she saw. Timothy was useless, of course. He agreed with everything Rebecca said, nodding along like one of those bobblehead dogs people put on their dashboards. She's right, Dad. The place could use some updates, maybe something more modern. He wouldn't look at me when he said it. I remembered a different Timothy, 12 years old, standing in my kitchen after hours, carefully plating a practice dish. Is this right, Dad? Perfect, I'd told him. You're a natural. That boy had opinions, dreams, a spine. Somewhere along the way, Rebecca had surgically removed it. On the second day, I conducted a small experiment. I left some documents on the kitchen table while I went to take a shower. The property appraisal for the cabin. $2.3 million right there in black and white. Also my latest bank statement showing a balance of $847,000, an investment portfolio summary worth another $1.2 million. Then I went to my study and positioned myself where I could see the kitchen through the crack in the door. Rebecca found them within 20 minutes. She looked around carefully, checking if anyone was watching, then pulled out her phone. Click, 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 photographing every page, every number, every detail. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She thought she was being clever, gathering intelligence for their scheme. She had no idea she was dancing exactly to my tune, providing evidence for my own case. That evening, I announced I was going for a walk. The fresh mountain air helps me think, I said. Might be gone a few hours. You two just make yourselves comfortable. Oh, take your time, Dad. Rebecca's smile was all teeth. We'll hold down the fort. Instead of walking, I drove straight to Denver. Sarah Brooks was waiting for me at a coffee shop downtown. Former police detective, now private investigator. Richard had set up the meeting. She was exactly what I had expected from Richard's description. Mid-40s, short dark hair, alert eyes that missed nothing. The kind of person who'd spent 20 years dealing with liars and criminals and could spot deception from across the room. Mr. Morrison, she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Richard filled me in on the basics. Your son and daughter-in-law are planning to have you declared incompetent. That's what it looks like. I need to know what they're really up to, how deep this goes, and what kind of evidence we can gather. Sarah opened a folder and pulled out some preliminary documents. I've already started digging into their background. Your instincts were right to be suspicious. They're in serious financial trouble. She spread out printouts across the table, credit card statements, loan applications, court filings. The numbers were staggering. Total debt is $77,000, she said. Credit cards, personal loans, auto financing. But here's the interesting part. She pointed to a court document. They were served with eviction papers 2 weeks ago. 3 months behind on rent. They're facing homelessness. So this isn't just greed, it's desperation. Gets worse. I found gambling records from several Colorado casinos. Your son has a serious problem. Lost over $40,000 in the past year alone. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. Timothy, gambling away money he didn't have while plotting to steal mine. The boy who used to save his allowance to buy ingredients for practice recipes had become someone I didn't recognize. There's more, Sarah continued. Rebecca's been busy. She's contacted 4 different physicians over the past 6 months, all specializing in geriatric mental health. Each time, she's told the same. Story about an elderly relative showing signs of dementia. Building a paper trail. Exactly. And she's been researching guardianship laws online. I have the browser history. How to have someone declared incompetent in Colorado. Elderly parent refusing medical help. Emergency guardianship procedures. She's done her homework. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Hope your walk is going well. We found some wine in your cellar. Hope you don't mind. I showed the text to Sarah. She smiled grimly. They're making themselves at home. That's good for us. The more comfortable they get, the more evidence they'll give us. What's our next move? We document everything. I'm going to set up surveillance on your cabin. Exterior cameras, completely legal on your own property. We'll see who they talk to, where they go, what they do when you're not around. We spent another hour going over the details. Sarah would handle the surveillance and financial investigation. I would keep recording conversations and gather evidence of their activities inside the cabin. Richard would prepare the legal defense. It was nearly 11 o'clock when I got back to Aspen. The cabin was mostly dark, but I could see a light on in my study. My private study, where I kept my most important documents. I parked down the street and walked back to the house, entering quietly through the side door. My footsteps were soft on the hardwood as I made my way toward the study. The door was open just a crack. Through it, I could see Rebecca at my desk, phone in hand, systematically photographing my financial documents. Bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies, the deed to the cabin. She was thorough. I had to give her that. She didn't hear me behind her. She was too focused on her work, her face illuminated by the phone screen, a small smile playing on her lips. The smile of someone who thinks they're winning. I leaned against the doorframe and cleared my throat. Rebecca spun around, and for one beautiful moment, I saw pure panic in her eyes. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by that practiced smile she'd perfected over the years. "Vincent, you're back early. I thought I heard a noise in here. Wanted to make sure everything was okay." At 11 at night, in my private study, with your phone out, I was checking the time. She slipped the phone into her pocket, trying to look casual. Silly me. I get confused in the dark sometimes. "Well, good night." She tried to brush past me, but I didn't move from the doorway. "Rebecca," I said softly, "how long have you and Timothy been planning this?" For just a second, her mask slipped. I saw calculation in her eyes, weighing whether to keep pretending or try a different approach. "Planning what, Vincent? I don't know what you mean." "The guardianship? The medical opinions you've been shopping for? The story about my mental decline?" She stared at me for a long moment. Then something cold and hard settled over her features. "You're being paranoid, Vincent. Timothy and I are concerned about you. Living alone up here at your age, it's not safe. We're just trying to help. By stealing my property, by protecting you from yourself." Her voice was steady now, confident. "You're not thinking clearly. The way you've been acting, the things you've been saying. Timothy's worried sick about you." I stepped aside and let her pass. She walked out with her head high, every inch the concerned daughter-in-law doing her duty. I sat down at my desk and began to write names, dates, observations, everything I'd seen, everything I suspected, everything I knew. The game was accelerating, and I needed to be ready for what came next. Outside my window, the mountains stood silent and eternal, but inside my cabin, a war was beginning, a war I intended to win. 4 days had passed since their arrival, and the tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. I'd been documenting everything, recording conversations, and watching Rebecca and Timothy dig themselves deeper into their scheme. The break came when Sarah called, with news that made my blood pressure spike. "Vincent, I've got the financial records. It's worse than we thought." Her voice was grim over the phone. "They're not just facing eviction. There are liens against Timothy's car, unpaid credit card judgments, and here's the kicker. They owe $15,000 to some very unfriendly people." "What kind of people?" "The kind that don't take no for an answer. I found evidence of contact with several loan sharks. Timothy's gambling problem runs deeper than we realized. He's been borrowing from dangerous sources." Suddenly, their desperate timeline made perfect sense. They weren't just greedy. They were terrified. The next morning, I invited them to join me in the great room. "Family meeting," I announced at breakfast. "Something important I need to discuss with you both." Rebecca's eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting triple sevens. She exchanged that look with Timothy again, the one that said, "This is it, the inheritance talk." They practically sprinted to the living room, settling into the leather couch with expectant smiles plastered across their faces. What they didn't know was that I'd been up since 5 a.m., arranging the room for maximum impact. 3 chairs positioned near the fireplace, a thick manila folder on the coffee table labeled Morrison Case File in bold black letters, and waiting in my study, ready to enter on cue, 3 people Rebecca and Timothy had never met. "Before we begin," I said, standing by the window overlooking the mountains, "I'd like to introduce some colleagues who've been helping me with a few matters." I nodded toward the hallway. Richard Palmer entered first, briefcase in hand, every inch the professional attorney. Behind him came Alexander Stone, the notary I had engaged specifically for this occasion, gray-haired, dignified, carrying a leather portfolio. And finally, Sarah Brooks, with her watchful eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 20 years collecting evidence and building cases. "This is Richard Palmer, my attorney," I said calmly. "Alexander Stone, a licensed notary, and Sarah Brooks, a private investigator I retained several weeks ago." The color drained from Rebecca's face so fast I thought she might faint. Timothy's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Neither of them moved. "Please," I gestured to the couch. "Sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Sarah placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it with deliberate precision. The first item was a photograph. Rebecca standing outside a medical office building in Denver. The sign in the background was clearly visible. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, M.D., Psychiatry and Geriatric Mental Health. "Taken 3 weeks ago," Sarah said, her voice neutral and professional. "Your daughter-in-law made 2 visits to this office. She was asking about the process for having a family member evaluated for dementia." Rebecca found her voice. That's an invasion of privacy. You can't just follow people around and take pictures." "Actually," Richard interjected smoothly, "in Colorado, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in public spaces. Photographing someone entering a building from a public sidewalk is entirely legal." Sarah continued, pulling out more documents. "I also obtained records of internet searches conducted from your home, IP address over the past 6 months." She spread the printouts on the table like playing cards. "How to have someone declared mentally incompetent in Colorado, guardianship laws for elderly parents, emergency conservatorship procedures. How long does guardianship take to process?" Timothy's face had gone from pale to green. "Dad, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, "because I'd love to hear it. We were concerned about you living alone up here at your age. We wanted to make sure you were being taken care of. By taking control of my finances, by having me declared incompetent." I kept my voice level, almost conversational. "That's an interesting definition of taking care of someone." Rebecca had recovered enough to go on the offensive. "This is ridiculous. You've been spying on us, recording our conversations." She turned to Richard with manufactured outrage. "That's illegal. We'll sue." Richard didn't even blink. "Colorado is a one-party consent state, Mrs. Morrison. That means any conversation can be legally recorded as long as one participant consents. Your father-in-law consented to record his own conversations in his own home. Perfectly legal." "Furthermore," Sarah added, "I have documentation of gambling debts totaling over $40,000, contact with unlicensed lenders, and evidence of financial desperation that provides clear motive for elder financial abuse." Rebecca stood up slowly, her composure finally cracking. "We're not going anywhere, Vincent. Timothy has every right to be here. If you try to force us out, we'll fight you in court. We'll tell them you're paranoid, delusional." "Actually," Richard said, opening his briefcase, "that won't be necessary. They filed their guardianship petition this morning." He handed me a document, emergency guardianship petition, filed by Timothy and Rebecca Morrison. "Perfect timing," I said. "Now we can respond appropriately." The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Dr. Sandra Chen's cognitive evaluation showed I was functioning at the 98th percentile for my age group. Sarah's evidence of their financial desperation and deliberate scheme to defraud me painted a clear picture for the judge. Rebecca was sentenced to 3 years probation and $20,000 in restitution. Timothy, who testified against her and revealed the full extent of their conspiracy, received probation and mandatory financial counseling. As for our relationship, that's still a work in progress. Timothy moved back to Aurora, got a job washing dishes at a small restaurant, starting from the bottom, the way I had 50 years ago. He calls me once a week now. We don't talk about the inheritance or the cabin. We talk about cooking, about the restaurant business, about second chances. Last week, he asked if he could visit for Christmas. I said yes. The mountains outside my window are covered in fresh snow. My coffee is hot, the fire is warm, and justice has been served. Life is good again. Experience taught me something valuable through all this. Families can break your heart, but wisdom and preparation can protect everything you've built. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you need to watch most carefully, trust but verify, and never underestimate the power of documentation when the stakes are this high.